And, boy, what a horrible thing to say. That others may see us. You know, I'll tell you what I think a lot about. I think about the bombing. And here's what I think about in this war. Bombing is an integral part of this war. And you will find next year, as this president tries to extricate himself politically and before the congressional elections, you will find he's going to trade American soldiers for American bombs. And since this war began, there's been no air defenses of the Iraqis. We have seen no statistics on how many bombs get dropped, sorties they call it, how many flights, how many missions by one plane, by each plane, a sortie. We have no statistics. We don't have embedded reporters on the carriers that are in the Gulf. We don't have embedded reporters in the air bases in Doha and other places that fly around-the-clock missions. We just don't know. Were there 100 missions a day at Tal Afar? How many missions are being flown right now? Is it exponential increase? And our ignorance and willingness to remain ignorant, and I fault the press too, the inability to ask questions. Why shouldn't a bomb that falls in a house and kills a mother, father, and 6 siblings, leaving a 15-year-old boy to determine he's going to spend the rest of his life getting revenge, why isn't that as much of a terror weapon, an American bomb, as an IED or a car bomber? Well, the answer is it is. It is. And it's an amazing sort of inability to look at it from that way. But do you have any optimism as we get done with our little thing here?
No. I wish I did. I mean, the sad fact is, one of the reasons why I was arguing against this war was not just that it was based on a lie, but it's a reflection of the reality that was recognized in 1991, that if you remove Saddam and you don't have a clue what's going to replace Saddam, you're going to get chaos and anarchy. And so people continue to say they want the elegant solution in Iraq. I mean, that's the problem. Everybody's like, well, we can't withdraw because we've got to solve all the problems. Ladies and gentlemen, there's not going to be an elegant solution in Iraq. There's no magic wand that can be waved to solve this problem. Yeah, well, look, if we get out and we have a plan, you know, it's still going to cost 30,000 Iraqi lives. Let's understand that. There's going to be blood shed in Iraq. They're going to kill each other, and we're not going to stop it. If we continue to stay the course, however, the 30,000 number may become 60 or 90,000. At the end of the day, we've created a nightmare scenario in Iraq, and the best we can do is mitigate failure. And that's what I'm talking. And unfortunately, that's a politically unacceptable answer. People say, no, we have to win, we have to persevere, there has to be victory. There's not going to be victory.
What about the chances of expanding the war? What about the chances of expanding the war into Syria or even, you know, into Iran?
Well, the sad thing right now...
Well, not that's just cross-border stuff.
The sad thing right now is that we have a Bush administration that's populated by people that don't understand war. They've never been in the military, they've never served in combat, and they don't know what it means to have a son die, or to have a friend die, or have a brother die, or have a comrade die. And so that's why you have a Secretary of State like Condoleezza Rice, who has the gall to stand before the American people and say that war is the only guarantor of peace and security. And now she testified before the U.S. Congress today, and she said that not only is Iraq probably going to be another 10-year investment of time, blood, and national treasure for the American public, but that Syria and Iran may very well be the next targets of the Bush administration. So this administration has learned nothing. But what's worse is that Congress has learned nothing. There were no tough questions to Condoleezza Rice. And now we have the American people. What lessons have we learned? What actions are we going to take? Where's the American media? And that's a good question I have for you. Where is the American media?
Well, somebody I know, high up official who disagrees, off the record of course, or privately, said to me about Condi, he said, well, when she became Secretary of State, we all heard that she'd have the president's ear, but we didn't know that all she'd do is lick it. Oh, I don't know what to tell you about the press. You know, until this week, I was always, because I spent so many years at the New York Times, and the New York Times is, for all of its fault, it's our national standard. It's the paper by which, certainly during Watergate, or when I was writing for it from 72 to 79, I felt that in going on writing about Vietnam and writing about the coup in Chile and writing about my favorite born-again liar, Mr. Kissinger, you could really write with great freedom. And it's sometimes I think, in just going through carefully looking at the stuff over the last few days, I think sometimes that maybe the solution, the New York Times Corporation is a very big industry. It's got a lot of internet, a lot of cable companies, other media, radio stations. Maybe they should just spin it off to somebody, who knows how to run a newspaper, because Murdoch. Or maybe there's a good suburban newspaper chain in Westchester or northern New Jersey, or maybe a bunch of kids in the Daily News could get their daddies to cough up enough money to buy it, and they could take it over. But somebody's got to do something, because it's too important an institution to be floundering the way it is. And we all have a stake. I asked somebody who worked there, we all have a stake in making this paper and urging it to get better quick. Because it is a paper that essentially failed in the mission it had against Bush. It had a mission to tell the truth, and it did not. And please, you can't just blame Judy Miller. It's not that simple. No, I'll tell you something about that story. What interests me no end is that she'd been doing what she's been doing for 6 or 7 years. And there was no question about where she stood, and particularly in the last 3 years, about who she was dealing with. And here comes the Joe Wilson story. She's an expert, allegedly, in the Times on WMD, weapons of mass destruction. She was with the early teams that went into the war. She wrote about it from the administration's point of view, but she certainly was an expert. Here's Joe Wilson. He writes an op-ed, and we know she knew about it in advance, but assuming even otherwise, the editors may not have known what she knew. And he writes this dramatic story about the administration being caught out in a definitive way from somebody inside. Here's somebody inside and said something of importance, and it's not an anonymous source, and she's not assigned to do the story. Why? To me, because they understood what she did and who she worked with. So the paper was empowering her in a way. In other words, an honest journalist, with the expert you'd want it, if you had a perception that she was an honest, straight journalist, you could do it. And so that's not her failing. That's an institutional failing, that it was recognized that she only represented that side of the house. And that's not the paper I knew. And that's not the paper we should stand for. Let's do some questions. Okay, I just did the first one. Talk about the reporting of Judy Miller. I think that was coming. Can we talk about the likelihood of a Bush administration attack on Iran, what it might involve, and what the results might be? You want to do some of these? You want to read them? No, you read them. I don't care.
Well,
let me do this. We should answer that question.
Okay, tackle it.
Iran's not going to give up the nuclear weapons. It's a country, Cyrus the Great. They're not going to give up the weapons.
They don't have any.
Oh, they're not going to give up their ambitions, then. Let's put it that way. That's not. Those are all factoids. The fact is, they have an ambition. They weren't very straight about it. They misled the IAEA. This guy won a Nobel Prize because he had an awful lot of integrity, al-Baridi. And so their hands aren't, admittedly from their point of view, if they're surrounded by people with bombs who have bombs who aren't their friends. They have Israel, which is always in any discussion the elephant in the room of any policy. They have Israel viewing Iran as the existential threat. I think it does. The leadership there does, as an existential threat, certainly more than Iraq. And what scares the hell out of me is I know some of the things they're doing. We haven't stopped very aggressive actions against them. Very aggressive, covert actions. We've been increasing it. We've been making very threatening, explicit threats of the most horrific kind. And every wise man I know says to me that we can't do it. We just can't do it because Iran is too powerful. We don't have an armed forces. If we did do it, there would be, if you think Osama bin Laden caused trouble here on 9/11, there are 3 million Iranians in America. You would see things happen here that would be unbelievable.